Hey guys, this is Raj. Hope y'all have had a great weekend or week. And today, for this video, we're going to talk about procrastination, which is a very important topic that a lot of people, not just college students, but just adults and kids in general, struggle with. And so this video is going to talk all about what it is and give y'all a bunch of strategies that you all have to pick to see which ones work for you to deal with procrastination. So first, excuse me, we're going to talk about what is procrastination. So procrastination, very simply, is just not doing the tasks that you should be doing until right before they are due. That's a typo. That should say DUE. But not doing them right before the deadline. So for instance, if I have an essay that's due on Friday, it would be a good idea to start working on the essay on Monday, do a little bit on Monday, a little bit on Tuesday, and so on. But most students, when they procrastinate, just wait till like Thursday night. And we've talked about before how that is not a good idea. One reason is you may figure out that with the essay, you may figure out that you actually don't know how to complete all the essay and you have to ask some questions. And if you're doing it on Thursday night, then you can't ask the instructor during office hours or with an email. And it's generally just more stressful. And sometimes you can't even get all the work done. And so this is a very important issue. And I don't know what the data says, but in my experience, I know for certain that, most people in college struggle with procrastination. So if this is something that you're struggling with right now, then that's okay. Most people struggle with this, and so there are still those strategies that we can do to avoid procrastination. Um, the first thing though is why avoid procrastination. So for the most challenging classes, like I've said, you really should be trying to do your work as soon as possible. Not just with office hours and getting help with office hours, but also because the work that you're going to be doing in your challenging classes oftentimes will take more time than what you think you will take, right? So I can't tell you guys how many times this has happened to me in the past where I think that an assignment is going to take like 2 or 3 hours, but it ends up taking like double the time, right? In my experience and other people's experience, that's a very common occurrence. And so giving yourself as much time as possible, is a very good idea. And procrastination also, prevents that from happening. And so why do we procrastinate? We do this to make ourselves feel better in the short term, right? And so maybe we're avoiding the stress of an assignment or the stress of a deadline. Maybe we are chasing some sort of addiction on our phones or something like that. But it will make us stress out in the long term. So this lecture, because procrastination is such a common issue and is very important to deal with, what I've done with this lecture is give you all as many different strategies as possible. So this strategy, it will have a lot of different content, a lot of different strategies. And like with every single video, you all have to pick whichever ones work with you, whichever ones you think will work best for you. So yeah, let's get into the strategies. So first, I want you all, before we get into the strategies, to just reflect on what you think students can do to reduce procrastination. So take a second, pause the video, and think about with your prior experience, what can help reduce procrastination? All right. So think about what you have thought about with your prior experience and see if these strategies align with your prior experience. I know that you guys probably have some strategies to deal with this because you all are experienced students, but we'll still talk about some helpful tips. The first and probably the most helpful strategy for avoiding procrastination is to rely on habits instead of willpower. And so we've talked about habits before in the first week. Willpower is your desire in the moment to not engage in a behavior, right? And so willpower is you saying in the moment that I'm not going to look at my phone, I'm going to do work instead. And a habit is saying that um, it's doing behaviors to where you cannot even engage in the addictive action, right? And so with the example of the phone, a habit would just be turning off my phone and putting it in a different room as a habit. And so habits are once they form, they take very little effort. Willpower, in contrast, takes a lot of effort, so it's not sustainable. And so rely on good habits. Habits usually take a while to form, something like 2 to 6 months. And so they do take a while to form, but being consistent with your habit will make it much more likely to be sustainable. In terms of avoiding procrastination, planning breaks within your work routine helps. And so having that sort of habit is beneficial. Maintaining a good physical and digital environment helps, right? So turning off your phone is going to be helpful to avoid procrastination. Having a physical environment like working in a library where everybody else is working will have that sort of culture of work. And that's going to help you avoid procrastination and get the work done, right? The biggest thing, though, the biggest positive habit to build, physical environment's really important, digital environment's really important, but I think the biggest thing is to just have a dedicated time where you are working. This could be like a dedicated daily time, a dedicated weekly time, right? So when I was in college, I would have something like from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. I'm going to sit down in a library, turn off my phone, put it away. And from this 3 hours of 3 to 6, I'm just going to be working on whatever I can work on with my classes. Um, Instead of what most students do, which is just not really have a dedicated time for work and instead have their schedule dictated by the upcoming deadlines only, right? And so for me, I would do something like from on Monday, I would work from 3 to 6. From Tuesday, I'd work 3 to 6 and so on. Um, every day of the week or weekday. And some days it would be more time, right? Just depends on my schedule. But most students, what they do is they will maybe they have, excuse me, the only big assignment due is like an essay on Friday. And they could be working on other stuff uh in their other classes and get work done early. But instead, what they'll do is they'll just do nothing on Monday because nothing's due on Monday. They'll do nothing on Tuesday because nothing's due on Tuesday. Nothing on Wednesday. And then they'll do some work on Thursday because the essay is due on Friday or something like that, right? Avoid that. The reason why is you're not really building a habit of having a constant work routine if you're just randomly working on some days and not working on other days, right? Obviously take breaks, obviously, on the weekend recharge, do whatever is sustainable for you. But the more consistent your work habit will be, right, where you are saying from 3 to 6 on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or from Monday through Friday, you're going to work and you're going to get as much done as possible, no matter the deadline. The more consistent you are with that, the less likely you will be falling into procrastination because you have the habit of avoiding procrastination and getting work done instead. So that's why I think this is probably the most helpful strategy that you can do to avoid procrastination. So now we'll talk about some other more minor strategies. The other thing that you can be doing is changing your thought habits. And so this means our thought habits are the things that we kind of tell ourselves in our mind. And oftentimes they are automatic. We don't even recognize us doing this. We are unaware of them. And so the first kind of step is to just be aware of what are your thought habits. What are the thoughts going on in your mind? And then from there, once we notice and are aware of our thought habits, we can then try to change them to make it easier for us to work instead of procrastinate. And so one example of this is to concentrate on either the process or the goal of a task based on what you like best, right? So for instance, if you feel fine with studying for an exam, but the outcome of the exam is very stressful, then focus on the process of studying, right? So if I think that for some reason I'll do really poorly on the exam, just don't obsess over getting a good grade on the exam and just focus on just doing the best you can with your studying. Um, Another example is if you really hate doing research on a topic for an essay, but you're excited on giving a presentation after doing the research, or maybe you're excited about getting a good grade on the presentation after doing the research, then focus on the outcome, which is getting the good grade or doing the presentation, right? And focus less in your mind about the research. These patterns of thought, changing them is very difficult and requires a lot of time and effort. And so, what we've talked about before with the planning, monitoring, reflecting cycle is especially important, right? So, if I were to do this, what I would do is be aware of my thought habits and then write down on a piece of paper just what thought habits do I plan to kind of change in my mind. I would monitor, I would be aware of what my thought habits are, and then I would reflect on if I was successful in changing my thought habits, why or why not, right? Um, Another thought habit that you can change is about opportunity cost. And opportunity cost is just what you lose by not doing an action, right? So for instance, when I became a teacher, the what I lost from becoming a teacher are all the other careers that I could have pursued because I became a teacher, right? In this case with studying, you may have the decision of working versus being on social media. And if you be on social media, the opportunity cost, which you are losing from your decision, is not being able to get work done and falling behind in your classes because you're being on social media instead of working. And so when you're thinking about what to do in the moment, in your mind, you should make the decision in terms of the opportunity cost, right? So for instance, you should consider the decision as I can either complete the assignment or I can get behind on my work, right? So making that decision where you're thinking about the opportunity cost and thinking about what you're leaving behind is going to make you more likely to avoid making the bad decision. All right. And so, how do you change your thought habits? Like I've said, observe your thoughts, right? So, record with your with a pen and paper or with your phone, just what you are thinking, and then using the planning, monitoring, and reflecting cycle. All right. So, another beneficial thing, this helps me a lot personally, is breaking down tasks into smaller, uh, more bite-sized chunks. And so, this is because we procrastinate more when we have tasks that are very challenging and overwhelming. Right. So for instance, an essay is a perfect example, right? An essay is a very long task with a lot of different tasks, right? You have to do things like research, you have to write an outline, you have to write all sorts of different paragraphs, and within each paragraph, you have to write a topic sentence and then supporting sentences and a concluding sentence and have citations. It's a lot of different tasks. And so that's why it's very easy to procrastinate because it feels overwhelming. And so instead, what you should do is what I would do is in a to-do list, you should write a to-do list and have the essay be chunked down into smaller steps, right? As many small steps as you think you should have. And so for the essay example, I would do instead of on my to-do list, instead of saying write the essay, what I would write is something like step one, research the essay topic. And then step two, take notes on what I've learned from my research. And then step three, write an essay outline, and so on and so forth, right? This example on this slide is breaking down the task of reading and writing a reflection on a chapter, right? And so in this example, this task is broken up into three smaller steps, right? And so skimming the chapter, reading the chapter while taking notes, and completing the reflection. So yeah. So now I want you all to pause and take a second to think about this question. Let's say you had to write an essay. How could you break this down into smaller steps? Take a second, pause, and think about this. All right, so moving on, any sort of smaller steps works with this one. What I would say is just think about the smaller steps that work best for you, right? And so if you think that having like five small steps is a good number for you, then stick with that. If you think that you need to have smaller, even smaller steps, like maybe seven or eight, then you can do that instead. Okay, so next thing is with avoiding procrastination, we want to, like I've said before, we want to make good habits and build good habits. And so part of this is even when you have a bad day, you should still try to get some of the, excuse me, get some work done. The reason why is one reason is doing something is better than nothing, right? And so if I have an essay and I originally planned to have two paragraphs done, and instead I just get half of a paragraph done or one paragraph done. I didn't meet my goal, but I still have something, right? Which is better than nothing. And the second big reason is that when we do at least a little bit of the habit, it still further cements the habit, right? Because forming habits in the long term really involves being consistent. And so even if you're able to do a little bit of progress every day, it'll still help form that habit over time. And, long term, that's what we want to have is forming the habit. Okay. Another strategy, this is kind of I guess something to change within your own thought habits is to just start the task. Um, what I mean by this is usually people think that they have to be motivated first to do a task and then do the task, right? Oftentimes, though, we gain more motivation over time as we do the task, right? And so with the essay, um, the example of the essay would be that when I start writing the essay, I'm going to recognize that it's actually not that bad, right? Maybe it is difficult, maybe it is hard, but in terms of like the negative emotions that I feel when writing the essay, it's not as bad as what I once previously thought, because I just started and I just recognized that it's not that hard or it's not that bad. Um, and so yeah, I would just say that, you know, if you just start and just even telling yourself that I'm just going to spend, 5 or 10 minutes doing the task, and then we'll see how I feel after that. Oftentimes, after that 5 or 10 minutes, you'll feel much better and you'll stick with the task much more instead of procrastinating. Okay. Next tip is to have friends that can support you. Excuse me. And so, obviously having friends, such as your college classmates or even your current EK cohort members, obviously having friends that can support you is beneficial for all sorts of different things, right? Study groups, having people to talk to about anxiety, things like that. But with procrastination in general, it can be helpful because you will have somebody that you can check in with or even keep you accountable, right? This is because we're much more likely to accomplish something to stick to a habit or a goal if we tell somebody that we plan on doing that, right? Because we don't want to let that person down and feel some sense of shame, right? So if I tell my friend, yeah, like today I'm gonna have half of the essay done and I'm not going to be, spending time on my phone. Telling my friend that and then later on checking in with them, and talking about how the essay went, or them checking in with me, is going to make me more accountable and more committed to accomplish that goal. And so obviously you want to pick somebody that also has good study habits and actually cares about seeing you grow, right? And is someone that you can trust. Um, and so that's why I think that, your fellow EK cohort members could be somebody that you can look to in the future when you're in university, as an accountability partner. And so, in terms of the type of support that your friend can give, there's four types of support that you can receive, and you have to pick which of these four types would be beneficial to you and communicate that to your friend, right? And so, one type of support is emotional support. This is receiving sympathy and care, right? So, if you feel angry, for example, your friend in this case would be listening and encouraging you to keep trying. The second type of support is informational advice, and this is just receiving information like suggestions or advice, to avoid procrastination, right? So maybe this friend is offering you strategies that they do to avoid procrastination that helps with them. The third big thing is practical support. So this is help that directly benefits whatever task you're trying to accomplish. So for instance, having somebody check in with you at the beginning of a work session. And the fourth support is appraisal support, right? So this is somebody that can give you information that you can use to self-evaluate, right? And so, for instance, a friend telling you if you are successful or not in limiting procrastination. So what I would do is think about which of these supports would be beneficial to you, and just, ask your partner, ask your friend if they can give you that support, right? So I would say something like, can you help me with checking in with me every day? Or can you tell me what helps you avoid procrastination, right? Stuff like that. So yeah. Okay, another strategy is to mark your progress. This can help to kind of be more sustainable and build a more positive habit of working instead of procrastination long term. So noting down the successes of your efforts will help you build a better self-image. And another thing here too is to not worry about streaks of progress, right? So don't worry much about if you avoid procrastination for like 6 months in a row, every single day, right? Instead, just appreciate the moments of progress that you get. And another reason why it's important is oftentimes over a long period of time, like 6 months, we kind of forget how much we grow, right? If you compare yourself from like January to June, in terms of your positive habits, it's easy to forget kind of where you were in January and how much you've grown since then, which is why it's important to mark your progress. Okay, so last big strategy I'll talk about is as a last resort to reward yourself. What this means is that if you're procrastinating because you'd rather do something else, like watch a World Cup game or a sports game, whatever it is, what you could do is watch a little bit of that game in every break throughout your work sessions, right? Um, so I would say only do this if every other strategy that you've tried before has failed. Excuse me. And the reason is it is very easy to do the fun activity like watching the sports game for longer than the break time. Right. And one reason for this is because our phones in particular are very addicting, right? They're literally made, things like social media apps like Instagram and YouTube are made to be as addictive as possible. Because that's how these apps and companies make money. And so it's very normal for people, including me, to like think I'm only going to spend like 5 minutes watching something on YouTube, and it ends up being 10 or 15 or 20 minutes, right? Way longer than I expected. And so that's why I say only do this as a last resort. And if you do want to do this, then it's probably better to do the fun activity just completely after the work session, not during the breaks, right? And so if you want to do this, what I would do is, let's say I am really looking forward to like watching a recent sports game, like the recent World Cup game. Um, What I would do is have a work session where I'm taking breaks throughout the work session. Maybe I'm doing the Pomodoro method where I'm taking 5 minutes of a break every 25 minutes. Um, but my breaks are doing things like just walking around and stretching, maybe using the bathroom, maybe getting a drink of water, not watching the sports game. And then after the work session and after all those breaks, then I will watch the sports game. That way, I'm not distracting myself during the work session with the game. So yeah, that is everything with procrastination. So again, I know that was a lot. Pick whichever strategies you think will work best with you. I will leave this video with one last question for you all to reflect on, which is what can you change in your own life starting today to help prevent procrastination? So yeah, that's the end of this video. Hope you all have a great day.